description of the temple being destroyed in Matthew 24. Now if we go to Mark, and we follow the Apostle Mark, in chapter 13, Mark writes, "As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, 'Teacher, behold what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.' And Jesus said to him, 'Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down.' As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him privately. 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of when all these things are going to be fulfilled?'" What were the four disciples asking about? What was going to be fulfilled? The Apostle Mark makes it very clear. The destruction of the temple, which was the single greatest symbol of Jewish power and authority. Okay, going to the writings of Luke, chapter 21, in verse 6. Actually in verse 5. "And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, 'As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone upon another, which will not be torn down.' They questioned him, saying, 'Teacher, when therefore will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?'" So again, we see from the writings of the apostles that the destruction of the temple was and is part and parcel of apostolic doctrine. Why? Because Jesus said so. And he's Lord. Hopefully he's Lord for all of us. Now, what happened to the temple? Well, there's actually a little more about this. Obviously, when Stephen was martyred, part of the charge that was raised is he said that Christ will come and destroy the temple and get rid of the customs that had been delivered by Moses. People were not very happy about that. They took Stephen and had him killed. And in the book of Acts, in the 17th chapter, we find Paul out in Thessalonica. Paul was way out of the land of Israel. He's out there in the Roman Empire, in Thessalonica. What happened in Thessalonica? What happened when Paul showed up and preached the gospel? Here's what happened. Now when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I'm proclaiming to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women. So you can see here, Paul went into Thessalonica. He went to the synagogue and he preached to the Jews. And who believed? Well, a lot of the Gentiles and a lot of the women believed. And as you can imagine, that created a split in the synagogue. And so in verse 5, Luke writes, But the Jews, becoming jealous and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. And attacking the house of Jason, they were seeking to bring them out to the people. When they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some brethren before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have upset the world have come here also." And Jason has welcomed them, and they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. They stirred up the crowd and the city authorities who heard these things. And when they had received a pledge from them, from Jason and the others, they released them. The brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. And when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. So, Paul was not well received in Thessalonica. And here Paul is, far outside the land of Israel. He preaches in a synagogue. Gentiles believe. The Jews are moved to jealousy. And there's a split. And the Jews turn the authorities against Paul and drive Paul out of town. Now, this didn't just happen in Thessalonica. This happened in a lot of places outside of Israel. And the reason we see that is because Luke follows the ministry of Paul as he carries out his apostolic work outside of the land of Israel. Now, when we follow Luke's writing, we can see Luke following Peter's ministry until there's a switch and he follows Paul's ministry. So, outside the land of Israel, far outside, in a community that's not even a Jewish community, a Gentile community, the Jews hear the gospel, they react with rage and jealousy, and they have the authorities turned against the believers. Now, Paul writes back after leaving, and he writes back to the believers at Thessalonica. And what does Paul say is going to happen